The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Welcome to the Jesse Blake Sports Report. Whether this is your first time here, your last time here, or somewhere in between, I appreciate that you're here today so that we can talk about whether or not John Tortorella screwed over the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings. So I want to paint the whole scene for you here so we got an understanding of what was on the line when tonight John Tortorella pulled the goalie in Philadelphia. He pulled their goalie when they were tied 1-1 with the Washington Capitals. He said, screw this. We need a regulation win. I'm going to pull the goalie. So going into tonight, the Eastern Conference had one playoff spot left on the line. And competing for that playoff spot was the Washington Capitals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Detroit Red Wings. The Flyers and the Capitals were playing each other. And the Flyers needed to beat the Capitals in regulation to keep their playoff hopes alive. And they were the fourth team out of those four teams that I listed. So they needed to beat the Capitals in regulation, plus get help from the other teams around them. They needed Pittsburgh Penguins to lose tomorrow night, and they needed the Detroit Red Wings to lose tonight to the Montreal Canadiens. So they were keeping an eye on the scoreboard, the out-of-town scoreboard, when they had the Red Wings and the Canadiens game on at the same time as the Flyers and the Capitals game. And the way the night went along, which was, if I'm being perfectly honest, this was one of the best nights in hockey that we've had in a while. It was electric with all the games going on, and watching Matthews trying to hit 70 and Toronto choking to Florida and all that stuff. And now they're going to face Boston, but that's a whole other video. We're talking about the Flyers here in the Flyers-Capitals game. And in that game, it was tied 1-1 in the third. And everyone's like, the thing is going to happen. The Flyers are going to have to pull their goalie in the hopes of getting that extra goal to make it 2-1 in regulation and win the game. And what did they do? It's tied 1-1. They pull their goalie and they allow an empty net. The Capitals score. The Capitals make the playoffs. But as I mentioned, the Canadiens and the Red Wings are playing at the same time. And if the Red Wings secure a point, if they beat Montreal, then the Flyers are out either way. The Flyers are done if Detroit gets any type of point. The way the Flyers can only make the playoffs is if they beat the Capitals in regulation, plus Detroit loses, plus the Penguins lose. So the Detroit Red Wings are down 3-1 at one point during the middle of the second period. And they're like, oh no, we need a huge comeback. And that's what they get. They get a huge comeback and they tie the game with 3 seconds left in regulation. And this is where the controversy comes into play. The game-tying goal to send the Detroit Red Wings to overtime and guarantee that they will get a point and eliminate the Philadelphia Flyers happened during the TV timeout where John Tortorella pulled the goalie. So there's around 4:11-ish left in the Flyers-Capitals game. And at that moment, John Tortorella decides to pull his goalie. During that timeout, and as the players are lining up for the face-off, is when Detroit scores and eliminates the Flyers. And we know this because on the ESPN broadcast of these games, these two games are playing side by side. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see on the screen right now, there's Kevin Weeks there in the ESPN studios, and the games are right next to each other. It's showing John Tortorella on the bench directing his players, and then the Flyers going to the faceoff. And the game is tied 1-1 with 4 minutes left. And at that moment, the goalie is being pulled. And Detroit, on the screen right next to it, has tied. I was going to say won the hockey game, but they haven't won it yet. They've gone to overtime, but they've secured a point, which eliminates the Flyers. And in that moment, is John Tortorella trying to screw over the Detroit Red Wings and the Pittsburgh Penguins by making it easier for the Capitals to get a point and win this game in regulation by having his net empty? Why is he going for this win? Is there a moment where you say, I'm putting our goalie back because we're not playing for anything anymore? Because I assume within the moment, because they didn't score right away. The Capitals didn't score until like the 3-ish minute mark. So they had the net empty for about a minute there. And there's a minute where I assume John Tortorella knows. And he knows that they've been eliminated. But in that moment, I don't really blame him for saying, hey, go back in the net. Unpull our goalie. You don't really do that, but I assume he knew. And we got post-game comments from Tortorella saying that he didn't know.
With regards to the goalie pull, were you getting info about the status of the Detroit game, or were you solely focused on this one?
I got info on the Detroit game right after they scored their empty netter. I think it happened pretty close together. But I was pulling them. I'm pulling them, and that was the right time to pull them. Didn't know anything was going on with Detroit at that time, but immediately after that, our video guys told us that Detroit just went to overtime.
What he's saying there, it kind of adds up that he says it happened right after the empty netter, but I also think it happened a little bit earlier, if I'm being honest, because Washington scored their goal at like the 3-minute mark, and Detroit scored their goal at the 4-minute mark of the Caps Flyers game. There's that minute buffer, but I assume it happened more instantaneously and the goalie was already out. So at that moment, you say, screw it. Just leave him. Don't put him back. Just play out the game. We're still trying to win. If we win, it looks better on us. And you don't say, goalie, go back in there during a play while we're on the 6-on-5 because the team in the other broadcast scored. You don't say that. The goalie's already out. You say, and that's it. That adds up. It could possibly add up that he knew after the empty net was scored, but I believe he knew a little earlier and chose to do nothing about it. That's where I am landing on this. Where do you land on this? Did John Tortorella know while the goalie was out? Did he not know until the empty net was scored? We know now when the goals were scored in terms of the games. Even if you weren't watching, we got video evidence because everything's out there now. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know wherever you interact with the show on Twitter or wherever. Let me know your thoughts on this controversy, and just a couple thoughts here on the Red Wings and the Flyers season. The Flyers, round of applause. Everybody expected you to be down in the bottom of the basement of the Eastern Conference with Columbus, and all season long you were in a playoff spot. That is something to celebrate, and it's a lot of times in sports is about the narrative and how you got to the point in the season, not a matter of just how you ended. So with the Flyers, if they had fought to this moment for the last month instead of collapsing to this moment in the last month, we'd look at this a whole lot different. I think there's so many positives to take away from the season, in a season where you weren't supposed to be competitive. You sold at the deadline, and you were still in the playoff race until the final day of your regular season, which is something to be very proud of. So Flyers fans, take solace in the season. It sucked for the last month and a half, but those are the breaks when your team is not supposed to be in that position. These things happen. Detroit, on the other hand, it's a little worse because you wanted them to take a next step. Yzerman was tasked with bringing playoff games to the new Little Caesars Arena for the first time ever, and that playoff drought continues, and that's really unfortunate. And I thought the Red Wings had it all year. I thought, because I was wrong on my Red Wings prediction, I had them at the bottom of the Atlantic Division, and they outperformed that all season long. And then in the last month and a half, after losing Larkin, they just completely collapsed, and it's not a great look. I wonder if Derek Lalonde's job is on the line here. They clearly need a little bit more pieces on the offensive end, because Dylan Larkin going down can't destroy your season like that. Goaltending needs to be solved permanently. This Reimer, Lyon, Husso trio didn't get you to the playoffs. It wasn't that successful. Goaltending needs to be solved, and I feel for Wings fans, because you thought this was the year you were going to be in the playoffs, and then all of a sudden you completely collapse, and Washington comes out of nowhere with one of the worst goal differentials ever and takes your playoff spot. That absolutely is rotten, and I feel for you, Wings fans. I think there changes need to be made. A couple heads might need a roll there in Detroit for this epic collapse, but that will be decided over the course of the summer. The playoffs are set in the NHL, which is super cool. We got all of our playoff teams, not all of our playoff matchups. So that's we got some things to sort out on Thursday's slate of NHL games. That is it for me tonight. I appreciate you being here. You could be anywhere in the world, but choose to be listening or watching us right now, and I appreciate you for that. Good night from Toronto.
And that is how it's done.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Jesse Blake, the guy that likes to hear his name twice in one sentence. Sure, I know him. No, he doesn't have an ego at all.